The World Economic Forum annual meeting just recently concluded at Davos, and sustainable growth and, of course, renewable energy was a huge topic of interest there. Today, we have with us Mr. Girish Tanti, the Vice Chairman and founding member of Suzlon Energy Limited, a company that pioneered green and renewable energy in India and across the world. Just before the WEF conference at Davos, Mr. Tanti penned a very interesting letter that gained a lot of attention, and the letter was addressed to the participants and the CEOs who would be there at Davos. We wanted to speak to him today on his impressions about what really happened at this elite gathering, as well as his thoughts on the way forward for India and the rest of the world as we lead the battle against climate change. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Mr. Tanti.
Yeah, hello. Thank you.
As I begin, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the key positive takeaways from the WEF annual meeting at Davos? And on the flip side, what did not go as well as expected?
Yeah, thank you. I think, this year's Davos meeting was, I think, very well represented by India. I think the Indian lounge was buzzing with activities. And even our three states which were represented there, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana, they had lots of activity. And I think, as we all know, the investments that Maharashtra got in from the engagements there are in excess of some 1.37 lakh crores, and Telangana also hit around 21,000 crores. So I think as a country, and the kind of representation we had, it was I think India was very well represented, and we were, kind of overall presence of investors at India lounge was also very strong. So from that point of view, I think it had gone well. If we look at, the beyond just the element of investments, I think as the founder, executive chairman of World Economic Forum, Mr. Klaus Schwab, spoke about that, the G20 presidency, which this year goes to our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, comes at a time when the world is looking for a leadership in today's fractured world. I think it couldn't have been better time for India to demonstrate its leadership. So from that point of view, we are expecting that with this leadership, we should be able to demonstrate a strong presence globally on India on the global stage. As far as the green transition is concerned, I think the core theme around renewable energy and the green transition, there was a very strong sessions, and we've seen that even in the latest IEA report, which came out, that by 2027 we expect close to about 2,400 gigawatts of new renewable energy coming into play, which is almost going to be about 85% acceleration from today's previous 5-year performance. So all in all, we are going to see a very strong energy transition theme going across the world, and there's going to be a good mix of low carbon systems that we would see coming up in the coming years in combination of wind, solar, biogas, hydrogen, and various other renewable energy, and to move towards a more secure and sustainable energy transition.
Sir, you had penned a very personal open letter to leaders at Davos before the event, and the letter carried your expectations. For our audiences, can you tell us what some of your asks were? And do you think that those expectations were met at Davos 2023?
I think, climate change has become kind of a core theme, and that was very well kind of at the center stage of the discussions there. And, we've moved to a scenario where I don't think now there's a full unanimous approach in terms of handling the climate change crisis. And we've seen that even in the climate change panel, that the targets that have been set out, that by 2030, the global countries have agreed to reduce it by about 43%. So that's a very strong pledge that we have now, moving into these directions. Basically, my attempt from making this open letter to the members was to bring about the renewable energy and how it can play an important role in today's world, both from a climate change and energy security point of view. When we look at that, I think basically this is something which we can achieve only together as solutions. As most of the world economies will have to kind of come together and work as one team and be generous about finding solutions to this. So I think some of the key priorities, both for the developed as well as developing economy, that I see is that number one is that we need to have more and more interdisciplinary cooperations between the countries. So countries need to chart out projects together on how we can work together to fight this common challenge. The other element is that there has to be a quick and speedy roadmap to adoption of renewable energy across value chains and across geographies. And I think be it governments, financial institutions, or leading renewable energy companies, it is important that they all come together to drive this transformation, to modernize the grids and achieve the ambitious renewable energy targets. A total of about $14 plus billion. If you just take India case in point, this is the amount that India has invested in just last 2 years. And the investments into renewable has grown almost at about 125% compared to the previous fiscal year. So I think India is already on that trajectory of a very strong growth. And with the dialogues that we've had during the Davos sessions, I think most countries are gearing up in a strong way, and I hope to see that COP28 we would have much more decisive actions coming in from most of the countries.
So, sir, it's been clear from what you're saying that there is a new momentum when it comes to tackling climate change and leveraging the power of renewable energy. But is there also a clear recognition that developing countries, especially countries like India, must be held to different standards and therefore receive additional help when it comes to leveraging the power of renewable energy and targets, etc.?
Yeah, I think, let's look at this in two parts. Let's just talk about first India, and then I'll take the point around developing and developed world. So if you take India case in point here, I think with the very ambitious, roadmap that our country has set out to get to a net zero by 2070, and the immediate target of 2030 of having 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030, and the recent new announcement around National Hydrogen Mission also. I mean, all these initiatives that our country has set out, we are now in that unique position, and also the initial steps of work which of growth which have happened, like even achieving our initial target of 175 gigawatts by 2022, which we have almost made it at close to 90% plus. So I think India is that way set on the path of the getting to the net zero transition journey, and we as a country are in a sweet spot today because both from on various elements. One is the national mandate. There is a very clear direction. Number two, as a country, we have our own technologies in the green space available. So we are actually not that much dependent on other countries to give us that access. We have a very strong and thriving manufacturing ecosystem in our country for renewable energy, and I think that's another powerful strength we have. And we already have a very stable and strong ESG-backed funding ecosystem in our country. So I think from that point of view, if you see all the ingredients that you need to move to a a net zero and country in terms of overall operations, we are very well positioned on that, and we are in that direction. So on one side, while we still get classified in the developing world, we are also a developed world in that. And India is at that very sweet spot of being able to play the kind of bridge between these two worlds. And really, we are also from various positions, and I think the presidency of G20 is one such achievement where we will see more and more India being the bridge between the two, developed and developing world. If we come in terms of the who kind of pays bill for the existing climate crisis that we have, and how does this get managed between developed and developing world? I think the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, they have established a very good framework in terms of the design principles on which this would be managed, and it's called basically the Common but Differential Responsibilities. And there is a well-defined structure under which how the responsibilities will be shared between the developing and developed world. So I think from that point of view, there is a good framework in place, and on the kind of key things that both the bridge needs to kind of bring in is, one is the technology side to make it smooth out the adoption of renewable energy in the developing world, and provide them the necessary manufacturing or the equipment support and the capabilities in that space. And thirdly, I think it's also provide the necessary financial aids that are required to make this transition quickly. So I think the world is coming together in this space, and there is a lot of good progress that is happening across the world. And I think we expect the upcoming, COP28 meeting, where we would see a more decisive actions coming from most nations.
So what are the key things when it comes to action on climate change is sometimes a lack of political consensus. So how do nations really build consensus and will, and the political intent when it comes to climate change? And like you said, India is on the right path. So how can India really guide the world on this aspect?
Yeah, I think, this is a very important and fundamental matter. I think for any country to kind of make the transition, first of all, there has to be a conviction and a clear direction from the top. And I think we as a country are blessed in that direction, that with the leadership of, Mr. Modi, we have a very clear direction of a net zero path to getting to net zero. And this is built out of strong consultation, which involves a good balance of economic, social, and environmental factors. So I think from that point of view, having the direction in place is the first foremost things. The second is that when you kind of get into implementations, these are all complex projects and challenges that the worlds kind of have to manage. And this can only be achieved if you strike a good balance between the governments, the businesses, and the civil society at large. So I think more and more countries are adopting approaches whereby this kind of stakeholder groups are coming together on the implementation side to make sure that we make that transition in a smooth way. I think today, India definitely stands out in this current, global transition to renewable energy. In terms of net zero, and we are very nicely positioned to play this role and support and guide some of the developing nations in this process. We as a country now stand fourth largest in terms of renewable energy producing nation in the world, and with a clear mandate of getting to net zero by 2070. So I think with this, we have a very strong enabling framework, and we are also working very closely with some of the developing nations under various alliance groups that we have to help them chart out their path and support in that transition.
So it's very interesting that you spoke about this because, in India, one of the goals we have is really the roadmap towards the $10 trillion dollar economy. So just to maybe turn the question on its head a bit, how do you see renewables really playing a role in driving India towards the $10 trillion dollar economy? And if we can look at a closer target, that of 2030, what do the government and the industry need to do to make sure that we meet and perhaps even over exceed those targets?
Yeah, I think there's nothing going to hold back India in achieving this 10 trillion economy. And while the target is at 2030, we may be positively surprised to that it could be achieved earlier also. I think there are several factors that are converging today for India. I think our one of the biggest strength in terms of growth that we have is our very young and dynamic population of our country, which brings in the natural growth that any nation today, I mean, most nations across the world are today, at a state where growth itself is a challenge for most of them. Whereas we are blessed with this $1.35 billion population that we have. And all of this is very aspirational and with growth oriented. So that's one element that India is blessed. And with this strong target that the country has set for adoption of renewable energy and net zero by 2070, I think this itself can be one of the strong levers in driving the economic growth, as that will be one of the fundamental elements which will bring stimulus to the economic growth of our country. And this can actually lead to a multiplier effect in growing in our economy. I think case in point is basically, if you see today, we are very well placed in the entire value chain of, manufacturing for the low carbon economies, be it wind energy, be it solar energy, and also getting up very fast in the hydrogen space. So I think that is a very strong, just alone if you take, the sheer market worth by 2030 of the low carbon technologies in our country would be $80 billion. So I think that alone is a very big kind of stimulus that can drive the growth in our country. And I think with this, we strongly believe that $10 trillion is something we'll probably achieve it before time of 2030, and the stimulus which will come from adoption of renewables is going to be a very strong fundamental supporter in speeding up this adoption.
Isn't it very exciting, sir, to see your optimism when it comes to India? I think that really bodes very well for our country. Now, but when it comes to sustainability in power generation holistically, of course, how can India and other countries really build sustainability in the overall power generation space more effectively and at a fast pace?
Yeah, I think this is very important. If we see today, moving to a transition of a renewable energy or a net zero kind of ecosystem, this can only be achieved if you work on the entire ecosystem in a very strong way. And there are fundamental kind of pillars in doing this. So number one, if you see, I would say is that purely, the increase in renewable energy, what percentage of penetration you have renewable energy into your grid is one thing which defines and helps in going towards a more sustainable energy transition. The second and more important one is also the energy efficiency measure. I think, while generation side is one thing, I think how efficiently we manage our system is the other element. And, we don't have any wasteful situations over there. And I think, so energy efficiency is the second pillar. The third pillar is around carbon pricing. I think the more and more, we adapt the carbon pricing into our system, will give a fair play to all energy sources to kind of get a quick adoption, because sometimes we do not realize, drive to go towards a low-cost energy, the cost that in the future we'll have to pay for the carbon that is getting created. So I think carbon pricing is very important. The third element is, I think, nations need to invest more and more in research and development in newer technologies, because there's going to be a continuous improvement process. And I think, we need to make sure that we remain ahead of the curve as far as technology developments are concerned. The other important element is, the building a very sustainable grid system itself, the whole ecosystem, because, as time goes, we need to make sure that our modern infrastructure of, grid is of a level which facilitates adoption of net zero concept of energy generation and is geared up for that transition in a strong way. And lastly, I would say that, it's very important that all important stakeholders, both from demand and supply side, are involved in collective decision making in whatever policy, regulatory, and implementation processes we put in place. So these are the 6 kind of pillars that any kind of nation needs to kind of take on to develop a smooth transition to a sustainable energy.
So it's very interesting that you spoke about net zero. In fact, my last question is on net zero. And we've spoken about the world, we've spoken about Davos, we've spoken about India, other developing countries, etc. But coming down to companies themselves, corporates, why should CEOs and boards really focus on their net zero strategies? Why is it so important beyond just CSR, sustainability, etc.? And what is in it for companies to pursue sustainability and a net zero future with a razor sharp focus?
Yeah, I think this is a very, extremely important in today's global growth of economies. And I think it's becoming more and more important for organizations and CEOs and boards to kind of look at their net zero strategy in a very serious way. And I think it has become a fundamental need now rather than a good to have element, largely built around a strong pressure system, which is getting built up due to the more and more adoption of mechanisms to get to managing the current climate crisis. And I think whether it's government, whether it's investors, whether it's consumers, I think across the entire ecosystem, we are seeing that a lot of pressure is being built about for companies to really take their adoption to net zero in a very serious way. So I don't think that this is something that is probably not on the radar of any CEO of any corporation. I think it's very important for all of them. And the fundamental drive, I think, also is coming that today the investor community is very kind of strong, and they are increasingly looking at investing in a more sustainable and green companies and companies that have set out a clear path for their climate action. So I think the investor profile itself is one of the important elements which is pushing adoption of net zero strategies in a strong way. And I think secondly, I think it's also the reputation of corporations and the brands. It's becoming more and more important that the ecosystem with which all companies work, whether they're with their vendors or their customers, I think all the stakeholders around them in their businesses are also looking to working with partners who have that vision and who are aligned in that direction. So that's the other driver of the market forces which is coming. And finally, today we've reached at a stage where, having a net zero target or moving towards adoption of renewable energy is not just green in terms of green power or green energy, but it makes economic sense. It's green as color of dollar or rupee. So I think from that point of view, today it's pure commercial sense also for any CEO to seriously look at their energy consumption pattern and quickly move to a net zero, because today it is most cost economic way to produce electricity, and it has reached a level of lowest cost producer of electricity from any source. So we are amongst that belt of energy generation. So I think purely on economic decision also, it makes a fantastic decision to move towards it. So I think whether it's the investor, whether it's the customers, governments, or pure commercial sense, all of them is pushing CEOs to adapt to net zero strategies as soon as possible. And if you look at some of the statistics, I mean, if you see today, almost 1/3 of the world's largest companies across the world have pledged to their net zero commitments. So 1/3 of the largest companies, yeah. So that itself talks strong about it. And this number is just going to expect it to keep snoring as the time goes up. And in India alone, also, if you see today, we already have close to about 30 Indian corporates which have set out and pledged that by 2050 they are going to go towards the net zero. So we are seeing now individual company commitments and global corporations, everyone committing to their individual pledges also. So I think this is a momentum which has just kind of taken flight, and it will only grow stronger each day that passes by.
Well, sir, thank you so much for the time you spent with us today with BQ Prime. Thank you for taking us through your perspective on what happened in Davos, and clearly, the focus that's come on renewables, the increasing focus that is there thanks to Davos. Thank you for showing us how renewables will play a huge role in India's development to a $10 trillion economy, and for telling us how India is really leading the world when it comes to this transition to clean energy in so many ways, and for your optimism about India and its place in the world when it comes to renewables and green energy. And of course, finally, for explaining to CEOs why they need to focus on net zero and why it needs to be a part of their energy strategy. Thank you so much for being here as part of this interview today, Mr. Tanti. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much.